This is English shorthand dictation number 84 and the dictation speed is 140 words per minute. Ready? Start. Indian democracy has succeeded for a range of reasons. An enlightened political leadership which wrote a remarkably progressive constitution, political parties which have played the democratic game within rules, an aware electorate which has kept the parties on their toes, a vibrant civil society which has championed rights and justice, a free press which has kept citizens informed and kept power under check, and institutions which have fulfilled constitutional obligations. Among these institutions, India's independent judiciary occupies a place of pride. For the most part, it has defended individual liberty and protected fundamental rights. It has expanded the idea of justice and pushed the state to support the vulnerable. It has resolved disputes between the state and citizens, among citizens, between the center and states, and between states. It has stood as a pillar in defense of the basic structure of the Constitution. It has served as a check on executive excesses, and it has given hope to all stakeholders, from the powerful to the weak, that there will be justice. That is why a robust and independent judiciary is so critical to India's constitutional functioning. However, in recent years, there appears to be a trend which suggests a much closer alignment between the judiciary and the executive than is healthy for a system based on checks and balances. The judiciary is far too important for anyone to assume it is perfect. On the basis of the principle that anything can be improved, this trend and its specific manifestations need further discussions. The first is the incentive structure of the judges. This is crucial to safeguarding the independence of the institution and maintaining its credibility. Though the executive has been able to exercise influence both directly and indirectly over the collegium process, the judiciary has fiercely guarded its right over appointments. But there is another way in which judges may not be entirely free of external incentives while exercising their duty. The prospect of being appointed to government positions after retirement could be a way in which the executive exercises control over an otherwise independent judiciary. In countries with judicial term limits, this trend appears to have only continued post 2014. When a former Chief Justice of India ends up becoming a member of Rajya Sabha or a governor nominated by the President on the advice of the Council of Ministers, doubts grow in the minds of citizens. Unless this incentive structure for judges is changed either through a prolonged cooling off period or a very restricted list of appointments, the perception that it is not just the legal facts of the case that determine a final judgment will prevail. The second issue is what legal scholars have termed as constitutional evasion. It is true that the Supreme Court is overburdened, but there appears to be a pattern where the timing of when a matter is taken up or when an order is delivered or judgment is pronounced has been convenient for the executive. To be sure, the judiciary itself operates in a larger national and political ecosystem, and to expect judges to operate in a vacuum may be unrealistic, but its ultimate loyalty has to be to the Constitution without being swayed in any way by either public opinion or political thought. There have been a range of critical cases such as the constitutionality of the changes in Jammu and Kashmir, the legality of the electoral bonds, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and most importantly habeas corpus petitions, which are quite central to Indian democracy. But these have either not been taken up or taken up after prolonged gaps or not concluded. At the same time, issues that appear aligned with the political preferences of the executive have reached their logical conclusion. On Saturday, the Indian Express reported that out of 10 cases which were to do with freedom of speech, the court upheld the right or gave relief in cases where the state and the petitioner argued on the same side, and in 6 cases where the state objected, there was no relief to the petitioner. Even in Ayodhya Ram Temple case, the Supreme Court should have delivered the long pending verdict much earlier than it finally did. But the timing of the final verdict worked well for the political executive. None of this may be deliberate, but it creates apprehensions which the judiciary can well do without. The third issue is that in its approach to contempt, the Supreme Court appears to have adopted a somewhat rigid view. As debates elsewhere in constitutional democracies have evolved, the charge of scandalizing the court has come to lose its validity. Yes, when there is an attempt to obstruct justice, when there is outright defiance of a court order by any party, when there is an effort to influence the legal process through extra-legal means like bribing stakeholders, the Supreme Court must step in. But when there is criticism of the court or of judges, then courts must be open, because it is this healthy criticism of institutions that help them improve in a democracy. Certain trends show that parts of the judiciary may not be working as independently as mandated. Placing oneself above criticism will not help the institution and its legacy. India's judiciary is a key pillar which has to be fiercely independent and be seen as such. This does not mean that it needs to be consistently adversarial to the executive, nor does it mean that it should be far too friendly with the executive. A relationship of respect but distance between the judiciary and the executive, and a relationship of openness between the judiciary and the citizens, is the most effective way for democracy to thrive and for the institution to regain its credibility. The new National Education Policy 2020 has been received with broad praise. The goal of universalization of early childhood care and education, and the focus on achieving universal foundational literacy and numeracy, is especially laudable. The challenge now lies in translating policy into action on the ground at scale. Most policy suggestions are not new, as several state governments have been trying hard to implement such reforms. However, the lack of consistent political will and the slow pace of adopting emerging technologies have stymied these efforts. We know how to educate children, as is evident in elite schools, but our inability to do so for all children is due to the failure in understanding the role of politics and technology. How are parents from less privileged backgrounds expected to understand the value of the current reforms, such as curriculum overhaul, teacher training, or activity-based learning in schools? These are all hidden behind school walls. Parents are not involved, and the visible impact of better education manifests later in life. As a result, the public school system has lost the perception battle to the private system. In private school system, parents are the most critical constituency. The private school system takes huge pains to dazzle parents through fancy brochures or computer labs. Public educators tend to be poor publicists. Unfortunately, national education policy ignores the political economy aspects of education and the critical need to involve the parent as a teacher and voter. Parents are only mentioned 25 times as compared to 221 mentions for teachers. It is because of the opaqueness of progress and lack of value realization by the constituents that the politicians across the spectrum have not paid attention to education as compared to other sectors such as infrastructure and skills training. Education reform attempts come and go based on the whims and fancies of officials and their unpredictable tenures. Even beyond political incentives, it is vital that parents are involved directly in the learning process of their children. Such home effects have been shown to be key drivers of learning outcomes. Parent and community engagement is not just a political carrot, but also essential for the child's progress. Models designed to include teachers as key facilitators for parent interactions also increase community respect for teachers, which is another key key objective of the national education policy. Across the board, teachers are motivated by how parents value them more, realize the positive things happening in school, and express their admiration for their efforts. Recently, we see that when parents notice education improvements, it translates into political popularity. Delhi, Punjab, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh are all early examples. In this context, governments and politicians will only do the hard slog to translate national education policy into reality if their efforts are easily visible and impressive to parents, a key voting bloc.